So Dr. Colman Noctor, you're very welcome to the podcast. For people listening, Dr. Colman Noctor is a child and adolescent psychotherapist. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into this today with you, Colman. Before we go tearing into stuff, you might just give us an idea of what that role actually means, what a child and adolescent psychotherapist actually does, just to give us an idea of what that role involves.
Yeah, well, I suppose I have a small private practice, and that would be where the bulk of my work is now. But I would have worked right across all the children's mental health services, so from inpatient units, day hospitals, outpatients, etc. But in psychotherapy, normally see young people who are struggling with mental health problems. So that could be anything from a young person struggling with eating disorder, anorexia, bulimia, something like that. Depression, anxiety is huge at the moment, more so than ever before. Now, the age group you can see any really age under 25 would be youth and young people.
Okay.
The bulk of smaller children might see things like play therapy, creative art therapy, because language and talking therapies might be a little bit beyond them at that stage. But really, when you get to kind of 11, 12, 13, 14, young people are well able to kind of articulate their story. And therapy is just about trying to put language and understanding on experiences.
Okay.
So young people who might be, I'd have a huge amount of young people who might have a history of bullying, being excluded, issues with self-esteem, self-worth, that sort of stuff. So it's really about giving them a space to talk through that with someone who's not their friend, not their parent, and someone who kind of can give them some advice. And mostly it's about identifying patterns, in terms of, well, this is the fourth time this has kind of happened in friendships and relationships. Yeah. Can we have a look and see what we might do to change that or alter it around? But usually understanding something is key to being able to tackle it. And so a lot of the start is around that. But as they're young people, it's the biggest part of it is rapport and relationship. They're coming in to see someone who they've been probably sent to go to see. Very few children and young people elect to go themselves. It's a bit like grinds. They're sent there. But so they have to see you as being on their side. So a huge part of it is building that rapport and trying to create a trusting relationship where they can tell you the bits that they're struggling with. And sometimes that can take a while, to kind of build that up. And there's lots of teenagers who start off with, hood up, knees up, don't want to talk to you, don't want to speak to you, don't want to engage. And then maybe a number of months later, when the work is finished, they're really upset about leaving the process.
Okay,
So it's varied. You don't know what's coming in the door in some respects, and that's the bit I like about it.
Okay, yeah.
But I think from a mental health perspective, because we don't have a definitive test, like there's no blood test for anxiety or there's no X-ray for depression, whatever it might be, it leaves a lot of kind of guesstimate and guesswork and piecing things together. And while that might frustrate a lot of people, it's always been something that has drawn me to it. I like the fact that it's not linear. That there's all these different
challenge there.
Yeah. So and a lot of it would be working out relationships with families, parents, dads, moms, all that.
In your clinic is in Naas, you're saying, yeah?
It's in Naas, yeah.
So with that clinic, does that you will do some one-to-one work individually with children, but do you have that then where like you will have sit-downs with the whole family and you're trying to mediate between everybody as well? That would be part of your work as well, yeah?
Usually if you're starting out with someone, you'd have maybe see the young person and then the parents themselves separately within the one of that. And then usually every few weeks you'd bring parents in to kind of update how things are going from home, depending on the age of the child. As the child gets older, they tend to get more independent. It's different working with a 17-year-old versus working with an 11-year-old. They'd have different levels of autonomy and everything else. But I suppose like everything, the issue is demand is far outweighs any capacity I have for supply. So if you're talking about the last number of years, I can tell you that probably prior to 2020, I might have got 5 or 6 emails, queries a week. I can safely say that since September 2020, and it shows no sign of abating, you'd easily get north of 20 or 30 referrals a week.
A big jump,
so there's a lot of worried people out there. There's a lot of young people struggling. Pandemic part and parcel of that, but certainly I wouldn't think it as the origin of the cause, but it certainly didn't help.
Maybe accelerate a bit. We might go into that a little bit more because it definitely will. But I suppose a question I'd like to kind of put to you because a lot of people listening to this are going to be parents, and the goal of listening today, I'm sure, is to how can they become a better parent and how can they better serve their children, basically. So in a perfect world, if a child was to come into our lives and the child was able to say, hello, father, hello, mother, this is what I need you to do for me over the next few years, what would that child, if they were able to articulate that in a perfect world, what would that be? What would they say?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm not entirely sure children and teenagers know what they need or what they want. So that's part of part of being a parent is giving a child what they need rather than what they want. And it's the hardest part because it involves being unpopular and saying no. And, you're doing it for all the right reasons, but it doesn't feel right at the time. But I think, parenting has always become it's become a lot more complex. Years ago, it was, keep them safe and feed them sometimes, and that'll do, whereas now you need them to excel educationally, spiritually, physically, looking after their well-being, 2.5 children, garden, St. Bernard dog, all these expectations. And I think we have overcomplicated parenting. Okay. I think the simplistic part of any young person and any child, if you can gather a sense or protect a sense of self-worth, self-value, and self-belief in that child.
They're your big three, are they?
They're my big three pillars.
Can you talk us through those pillars? So,
yeah, I think self-belief and self-value are different to what I think we understand them to be. So I have lots of parents come to me and say, I want my child to be more confident. I want them to be able to speak out and be more assertive.
Which is normal. I think we all want that to an extent.
Yeah, and confidence is handy. But confidence is not what you want your child to have. You want your child to have self-value. So confidence is my performance. It's how I project myself out into the outside world. So I can be very confident footballer, I can be very confident singer, I can be very confident maths. But my self-evaluation is completely different. So my self-esteem is my relationship with myself. So you can have a child with high levels of self-confidence, but low levels of self-worth. So, you can oftentimes see, people who might be, they'll sing in front of 80,000 people in Slane, but they might walk off stage and go, I was rubbish. And all the adulation and praise in the world. So they're confident, but their self-worth is not it.
Okay, yeah.
So what we're doing is we're focusing a lot on confidence, not a lot on self-worth. So I want my child to be able to perform, to exude or to show a degree of assertiveness and self-belief, when in actual fact, many of those children may not have that inner workings. And it's your self-evaluation that's crucially important. So the child who can see effort over outcome, that's a real huge, benefit. So you can say, well, look, I didn't get 600 points, but I gave it a good whack, and I'm happy with that. It's also about children having a good, accurate belief of their own ability and their own limitations. I think we're growing up in a time where, as parents, we're kind of, be the best that you can be and live out your potential and all of that sort of stuff. And I think if there's a generic problem for children, it's expectation and pressure.
That's passed on to them.
That's passed on. Yeah. That's a feature of now that I don't think was a feature before. And
why do you think that is?
I think because, lots of people say social media and comparative cultures and all is part of it, and it certainly is. Part, in terms of, you're looking at your kid and you've won a black belt in Taekwondo and you're only 6, and my 6-year-old is still got Velcro shoelaces, and you're going to go, what am I doing wrong? Like, why can't I live up to that? And look, even we're talking about back to school, and I was talking to someone, they were saying like all these Instagram lunch boxes with, hummus and all this sort of stuff, and you're going, oh my God, my jam sandwich that I'm giving my kid isn't enough. So parental competition is part of that, but it's not just that. I think there's also a bit around, we grew up in, well, certainly my generation of the 90s was kind of, the prom queen and the American dream and be all you can be. Yeah. And I think we have the means, perhaps many people now, to give our children the best opportunities to, and maybe feel that, they're going to have more opportunities than I am. So, my child swings a golf club, right? I'm going to get him Callaway clubs, and I'm going to get him into the, and vicariously we try and relive our own experiences, perhaps through our children. And maybe that's new. Maybe that's part and parcel of contemporary culture that wasn't there before. And I always use the example of grinds. When I went to grinds for past maths so that I could scrape a D in my Leavenscert. And that was the only reason my mother sent me there. Now you just have to go past and you hear ads for kind of autumn grind schools for a week here. Yeah. And it's not children don't sign themselves up for grinds. We sign them up. Do you know what I mean? And so from the point of view of, I think there's, as parents, we probably are contributing to that pressure and expectation in a lot more of an active way than we probably are aware of ourselves.
Okay, yeah, we might delve into that a little bit more, because I think like most of us listening to this will be parents, and it's great. I think some people might plug into this thinking, okay, what you look at the child, how can I look at the child? But often they forget to look at themselves. And I think, as you're saying there in your clinic, when you're working with the child, the parents are an incredibly important part of the process as well. Like, so I think with going to that culture, like we mentioned about social media and the comparative culture, like I think most people can agree to some form of consensus that that's the way it's gone. When we go on Instagram, for example, and we're scrolling, we see everybody's happy, perfect lives. That does have an impact on us. We're naturally going to compare ourselves to that. But would you say it was always part of our culture? Like I think back to my own parents. Like my dad grew up in a small rural village in Tipperary, and my mum's family were from Clare as well, from a small village. And I think a big thing, even it seems to be embedded into Irish mentality in society, is comparison to the neighbours and what the neighbours are doing. Don't let the neighbours know this about us, and then also what are they doing? And like again, I used an example on an episode recently. Like I remember my dad always telling me when they went to mass on a Sunday, the whole obviously village go to the church and everybody's there. The priest reads out the offerings of who donated what, which is absolute madness when you think about it now. But the pressure that would have put hardworking families on back in the day, that this has kind of been ingrained in us in certain ways. And do you think like it's a deep cultural thing in Ireland that's probably part of it as well, that comparative thing, and this is just one way we're outlaying it onto our children? Or is it more just, do you think, a more modern thing?
I think from an Irish point of view, the keeping up with the Joneses is not new. We always needed to do that. But there's also kind of the Irish mentality. I remember my granny used to send me down to the shop with a bag, not because she was environmentally friendly, but she didn't want anyone to know what she was buying. Do you know what I mean? So it was kind of, so there was a kind of a, non-bragging sort of mentality that that could be seen as arrogance or something like that. And I think perhaps the social media culture has allowed us to get over that.
It's flipped that completely
from that point of view. But from the point of view, what's different is, like, if you got a new mantelpiece in 1995, I'd have to go to your house and see it in order to go,
very true,
we need to do up our mantelpiece. Now you can send me a picture of your mantelpiece while I'm sitting at home, right? And the difference is, when you become producers of media as well as consumers of media, then you're not just comparing yourself to celebrity, you're comparing yourself to people who live two doors down. And that's a much more live comparison than it would be before. So, and I my children play sport. I go and I watch and maybe see one young lad playing really well, and I go, God, that's because his dad is out with him now most evenings, and I'm not doing enough of that, and I need to do more of that. And so there's no short of opportunity for us to compare ourselves poorly with other people. And that's nothing to do with social media. That's just to do with me feeling that I need to be a good dad, a good career person, a good this, a good that. And we oftentimes talk about, mums under that pressure.
Massively,
dads are under that pressure too, from the point of view of, am I spending enough time at home, or how do I provide this, and how can I...
Yeah, something we talk about regularly in the podcast here is like trying to get that balance of being the provider dad, so out working, doing what you have to do, but then also being the present dad as well. And like, I think something I've seen over the years is that I think the pressure to be more present is definitely become more of a modern thing, probably in quote unquote. Like, obviously it was always there, but in general, the old stereotype would have been the dad was out working all the time, mommy was at home looking after the kids. Whereas now I think our generation are kind of in this transition where the mothers are actually out working as well, and then trying to be present at home, and then the fathers are trying to be more present at home. And I don't know whether we've fully figured this out just yet. I think we're probably that generation that's trying to bring it from one to another in that transition. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, and it's not that long ago where you're reading your Irish book and it's Tá Daddy a gobar agus tá Mammy sa kitchen. And that's what you learned, from that point of view. But we are in a different world now, and I can tell you that I'm working with children and families for 25 years. I can tell you that every year there's more and more dad involvement in the therapy. Early days, you never would have seen a dad come to a session or have an interest in that, or show a genuine concern. Maybe because they weren't let to come, or maybe they didn't want to come, or they're too busy. Whereas now you do. And I think there's a narrative around, it's great to see more dads pushing buggies, but dads do a lot more than push buggies, from the point of view of their involvement in, and their concern and their awareness, and how tuned in they are to their children's lives is crucially important. And I really celebrate that. I think that's a wonderful transition to make. But that doesn't come without its pressure. Do you know what I mean? So, and we've listened to a decade of parenting experts like me saying it's not about quantity of time, it's about quality of time. It's not about, things, it's about experiences. It's not about, and those things are really true, but they also create a pressure. Am I doing enough quality experiences with my children, and how can I do that and do all this other stuff as well? And I think it's not an easy time to be a dad. It's not an easy time to be a parent. And I think the landscape has changed so much in the last 5 years around, or certainly 10 years, around children's lives, that it is probably the most difficult time to be a parent.
What do you think the biggest factors are that have kind of, I suppose, supercharged that change in the last few years?
I think technology is undoubtedly, it has changed the landscape of how children communicate with each other and how they communicate with us and how they learn. I was only talking to public health nurses there recently, and they're now getting rid of the block building test in development because children don't know how to do it. Not that they don't have any difficulty in terms of doing it, they just have never done it before. To kind of, that's even changing our function.
Wow, that's that's amazing.
So, and the idea around, I suppose, our children's physical environments have never been smaller, and their virtual environments have never been bigger. But our involvement in our children's lives, and lots of people say, oh, they lament the day when, in the summertime when we grew up, you sent them off at 9 o'clock and we came home at 9 in the evening and nobody knew any the wiser. I still think parents have a very poor grasp of what their children's lives are like now, because they're up in the room on a portal to the outside world, of which you've no idea who they're talking to or how that relationship is going.
Very true,
Whereas before, you might have had moments where they'd come in and you'd see the pals visiting in the kitchen or whatever. You'd get a sense.
You'd know their circle, because their circle was all on your doorstep. Really, that's all they had. Whereas now it could be anywhere across the world.
And it's really difficult to know what your child is. I've sat with parents who are going, I had no idea that they were going through that. I had no idea that they were experiencing that bullying or exclusion, or that they were even, in that circle, or that they even knew those people. And, you can have this idea of, it was great years ago because we didn't have that kind of surveillance. But now, just because your child is up in their room, doesn't even mean that they're safe.
Which is incredible when you try to wrap your head around that. Like, it really is scary. And again, like, with regards to communication, say if a child was going through cyberbullying, which is probably something that you've seen huge rise in recent years. Something I suppose I'd have in my mind there is, like, you'd love if your child was going through that, you'd obviously love for them to tell you that. But I could see a barrier there for very straightforward being, say if I was on Instagram and I was getting bullied on Instagram, the parents' reaction, or my fear of my parents' reaction, might be, okay, look, we're getting rid of that. You're not on that anymore. And they have connections with their friends and other people that they don't want to lose. So would that be part of the reason that there's a communication breakdown there, where children are maybe afraid of communicating these things to their parents? Maybe they know they should because they know stuff that's going on, but they're just afraid that it's going to get taken away from them if they do mention it, and as a result they could suffer in silence. Yeah,
I think most people say parents will give a phone to their child with a sense of trepidation and go, no, you be careful with this. And there's a real fear of the I told you so when it goes wrong. Right? So the number one reason why children don't report that they're having a difficult time online is for exactly that reason, that the phone will be taken from them. So the most useful thing you can say to your child is, no matter what, it doesn't mean we'll take the phone off you, but you still need to come to us and we'll have that conversation about it. And I think, the idea around how we as parents offer that open door policy, that's reflective of the relationship that you have over a period of months and years. It's not just one conversation. Do you know what I mean? So children will trust you because they trust you.
I was just going to say, it comes back to that word trust, really, doesn't it? And again, I think the good summary of trust is that it's a very hard thing to get, and it's a very easy thing to break once you get it as well. It's something that's so tender.
100%. And children and adolescents and teenagers especially are kind of naturally suspicious of adults. They see you as being kind of anti-fun, anti-crack and that sort of stuff. So they'll always assume there's that kind of...
as cool as you want to think we are as parents,
And that's another interesting thing. I mean, I think the gap between parents and children is less than it was before. So I'll give you an example. Like I would listen to kind of similar music to what my 10-year-old daughter would listen to. We'd both bop along to Kylie's new songs or whatever. Whereas that wouldn't have been the case when my dad was growing up. He listened to Perry Como or something.
Kylie wasn't around.
And even you look at pictures of that generation, and they were 20, but they looked about 40.
It's true.
Whereas now I think the idea of parents are trying to stay young as much as possible, and children are trying to grow old as quick as possible. So that gap is not necessarily as clear cut, and so that leans itself towards trying to be more cool and friendly than it is about being boundaried and being firm.
And where could that be an issue then, when you're trying to be the cool dad, let's say? How could that potentially cause problems?
You see, children don't want another friend. They need a dad, or they need a mom, whatever it might be. And so in that situation, your role as a parent isn't to be in agreement with them all the time. It isn't about facilitating everything that they need. And it isn't about providing them with every opportunity that they wish to take. You know, it's about, your job is almost like, the task of childhood is regulation, right? So you take your 2-year-old to the shop and refuse to get them buttons and they have a tantrum. By the age of 22, they don't do that anymore. So they've learned to regulate over that 20-year gap. And they've learned that through you and school and law and all these things that kind of So our job is to regulate, or teach children to self-regulate. And that means putting in boundaries. And that means, you know, that's enough ice cream. That's enough. You need to go to sleep now. You need to do this now. Because children don't have a capacity for self-regulation. You don't go to a kid, there's 5 liters of ice cream, you know, have at it and come back to me when you vomit. You know, we tell them that's a portion, that's enough, all that sort of stuff. So despite wanting more, we have to say, no, this is enough, right? And the clash in that is that sometimes we don't know how much is enough or how much is too much, or we don't want to be. And again, I think that's maybe part and parcel of the fact that maybe we are working longer and, you know, you don't get to see your kids. Like if you're dropping your child off, or you see them in 15 minutes in the morning or 20 minutes in the evening.
It's intense, you know, when you're dropping them off and getting,
you know, everyone's cranky and tired. And so the weekend comes and it's like, here we go, off to the toy shop or whatever it might be. That's something we have to negotiate and we have to work out rather than just indulge. Do you know what I mean? So the idea of self-regulation and teaching regulation is about role modeling that. And that's sometimes about, can we stay up for another half an hour? No, you school tomorrow, you gotta go. Do you know what I mean? And that means they'll fall out with you and they'll be grumpy for you, but in their 20s they'll thank you for it.
I think it's a great summary there, because you often hear parents, particularly dads, say, I'll never leave my kids wanting for anything. I want to make sure they got what I didn't get and stuff like that. And I think when you go all in with that mentality, you kind of lose sight of what you spoke about there. I think it's it's hard to strike that balance, and sometimes you'll get it wrong. You'll be on either side of it. But I think it's a great way to kind of give people perspective there that, like, again, boundaries are a huge part of this. And as you said, as they get a little bit older then and they have the chance to kind of process it and look back, that's when they'll thank you for it, which is
and again, I'd say if you reflected on your own life, most of the good decisions you made were regulated decisions. Where you kind of said, no, I'll step back now, or I'll give that up now, or that's enough of that, or, you know, whatever that might be. And that spares you indulging or overdoing something.
I think it's something I speak about with clients in the gym all the time when we're talking about nutrition or something like that. You're talking about short-term versus long-term gratification, you know, and trying to wrap your head around that, because you get a craving for this food or that food, but you know after you eat it in an hour's time, you're going to feel like crap and you're going to even feel worse than you did now. Whereas if you can see the bigger picture and maybe let the craving pass or choose a healthier option, you're going to feel so much better than a couple of hours later. But particularly as a child, you don't have that perspective as all. It's hard enough as an adult, but definitely not as a child. You wouldn't have that. So, that's a fantastic summary there. And with the clinic that you have, just to kind of stay in the parenting a little bit more, because I think there's huge value here for people listening. When the dads are involved and we're talking, I think the cyberbullying is a really interesting subject. And something I often hear about, we had a Dr. Dean McDonald in here talking about the impact that social media and technology has on kids, and it was a fascinating conversation. But what he kept talking about was the studies were all done on screen time, which is cool, and obviously you have to monitor that. But obviously the quality of screen time can vary dramatically depending on what you actually have on your screen, you know? Like, for example, if I had an hour-long podcast that I was watching with Dr. Colman Noctor talking about how to be a better parent, there's huge value in that. Whereas if I was watching an hour of, I don't know, something shitty on Netflix or just scrolling through Instagram, it's not going to be of the same quality. Because you've mentioned now a couple of times, like, and you're dead right about, like, spending quality time over quantity. It's very easy measure quantity stuff, but it's very hard to measure and kind of have a perspective on the quality side of things. So if we talk about a dad, let's say, who maybe you've been working with in your clinic, and you're talking about that quality of time, and we're saying, like, how would you give them some, maybe something to, how would they measure that they know that they're having quality of time for that perspective? Like, what would they have to kind of measure up against that when they review their day and go, I had half an hour with my son playing in the back garden? What would be the boxes that they were trying to check mentally for that was a good quality piece of time? Is it keeping the phone away? Is it, like, is there anything that you would work with dads that they could have something to measure against? Or maybe that's the complete wrong way to look at it.
No, it's not. And a common conversation over the years would be, I would say to dad, you know, your daughter or your son feels a bit invisible. Right?
Yeah.
And dad gets defensive, or mum gets defensive and says, I bring you here, I bring you there, I bought you that, I bought you this. I put a roof over your head, all
Yeah.
that. And, and that's all true. But say the child says, but you never asked me how my match went
Yeah, okay.
or how I play. So what they're looking for isn't you to do things for them. It's interesting. We did this study a few years ago around quality moments, and the things that children said and things parents said were completely different. So the children were saying, oh, that time we built a fort with the cushions on the couch, when mom was away or whatever, or it was something we were supposed to do. Or that time when we were going to the match and we had the puncture and we were all laughing at dad, sitting around trying to do
stressed out.
Those are things that they're the memories that people take because it's something that's exceptional, it stands out. And you don't remember what someone did, you remember how it made you feel.
Yeah.
So the idea around how you create, so it doesn't have to be, no child said, oh, that big marquee that we had for my communion was my top moment. That's not, or that big fancy holiday we went on, that wasn't it. There's almost these moments in time where there is an authenticity between two people, and that can be just laughing about something or having a joke about something or whatever that might be. Somebody mispronounces a word and everyone has a bit of a laugh around it. They're tiny, minuscule things, but they're cumulative, so they add up over time. And so, I oftentimes, it's kind of a grim thing, but if you're talking about my obituary, I would hate people to stand up and give a CV of what I did. I'd like them to describe who I was.
Yeah.
And warts and all sort of a thing. So children it's those kind of, and they're almost the unplanned ones. If you're trying to get the perfect day and we're going to go out and do it.
They're like the non-Instagrammable moments, really, aren't they?
Yeah, but they're not going to be captured on those things. Do you know what I mean? And how many times have you had a kid kind of stand up and smile for this picture? And they're, it's for that moment to kind of create an image of something. Don't take the picture. Don't ruin that moment. Do you know what I mean? But we live in a world where if it's not captured, it's like it didn't exist. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But to measure quality, it's about closeness of connection, rich moments.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? So if I said to you, do you love your partner? You'd probably say yes. If I said to you, when did that happen? You wouldn't be able to say the 6th of February.
Stage,
You'd say over a period of time when she made me a cup of tea when I wasn't feeling well, or she laughed at a joke that I knew that wasn't funny, or that day when we got caught out in the rain, or something like those. Those will be the moments that create that connection. They're not staged events which we can kind of.
It wasn't the holiday to Paris or something like that. Yeah,
well, it might have been part
maybe
of
it got
it.
rained on when you were there. Or something.
But you know what I mean? So there's it's not about gestures. It's about connection. Yeah.
That's great to summarise it. No, I think there's I'm hopeful to a lot of guys listening to this, they'll take a bit of perspective of that, because I think when we go back to what we mentioned earlier about the comparison thing, they're very hard moments, as you said. You can't really capture them, and then as a result, you can't really measure them against anything like that. So I think if you can get it clear, if we took nothing else away from today about the perspective of quality over quantity and what that actually looks like and feels like, I think would be huge for anybody listening. Colin, I'm also we could go on about the children aspect here of mental health for so long. One thing before we do kind of come away from it, because I want to talk to you about the new book you have out and a little bit more about adults' mental health, because I think it's all intertwined together as a parent, definitely, is the report that came out a while back on the CAMS report. And again, I'm not an expert in this field, so I'm not going to try and commentate over it, but the overall feeling from it was from a lot of professionals like yourself seemed to be that, I don't think it was a major surprise to anybody who was in the field, but obviously, seems to be a lot of shortcomings as a country and what we're doing for our young people. Could we talk about that for a couple of minutes? Maybe you might give us a little summary of where that was.
Yeah, I can. I mean, I'm firstly going to say I'm not an apologist for CAMS. So, I worked in CAMS services for many years over the years, but there are definitely problems within it, and there's funding and resources issues and everything else. But for me, the CAMS is sometimes a handy and convenient whipping boy from the system's point of view, because it is the kind of bold child of the health service, if that makes any sense. But to give you a bit of context,
just before we go into it, could you explain exactly what CAMS stands for and what their actual roles and obligations, just in case someone listens?
So CAMS is CAMHS, is a child and adolescent mental health service.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I'll just give you a brief history. It'll give you context, right? Prior to 1960, we never had psychiatry services for children. So this guy from Scotland came over and he set up a child psychiatry service. And for 6 months, nobody came. There was no referrals. And he said, Jesus, Ireland is this amazing place. None of these children have mental health problems. We didn't have an issue with being a medical miracle. We just had a huge stigma problem. So nobody would go when it said psychiatry over the door. And we had asylums and people thought their children would be sent away and never come back. So they said, right, we'll rebrand it. We'll call it a child and family centre. And whoosh, they got all the referrals. But everything from trauma, poverty, neglect, overcrowding. So then they changed it to a child guidance clinic in the 80s to try and say, no, it's just about the kids. It's not about, we need to narrow this down a bit. And then in the 90s, they changed it back to a child and adolescent mental health service. So it already had this kind of reputation of being a catch-all for everything. Right? Now, CAMHS is a medical, biological health centre. So it treats things with mental disorder. So eating disorders, OCD, depression, and things that would respond to medical treatment. But what happens is CAMHS has been a catch-all for trauma, bullying, low self-esteem. So it became almost things that it wasn't really catered for. And so it then started to kind of wean its way back and refuse things. But there were no other services available to cater for all those other things. Do you know what I mean?
So if I went with an eating disorder, for example, if I was a 16-year-old with an eating disorder,
you go to CAMHS. But if you say for example, here's a classic example. Young person who is being bullied in school. They maybe have a learning issue around dyslexia. They are suffering with that and their mood is low. They have high levels of anxiety and they start smoking weed, right? So that comes into the referral and they'll say, well, yes, there's depression and anxiety there, but you need to go to substance misuse to sort out the weed problem and then we'll come back and look at that. So then you go to the substance misuse service and they say, well, actually you've got a mental health problem which is causing you to smoke weed, so you need to go back there. Then they'll say, well, actually you were bullied because of your learning difficulties. You need to go to educational psychology because it's your dyslexia is the issue. So all these three services are passing this child around and nobody's working together. Right? So for me, it's very simple. Say, for example, a village, CAMHS came in and it was a plumber. And it said, look, we've no plumbing jobs. Would you mind tiling my front room? And would you mind cutting my hedge? And would you mind doing this? And so it did it. And then all the plumbing jobs started to pile up. But there was no tilers. There was no horticulturists. There was nobody employed to do the other stuff. And so that's the issue. So for me, it's not about giving more resources to CAMHS. It's about developing that primary care service where children can get intervened with early. So as soon as they show signs of being excluded or struggling with their mood or struggling with that, they'll have a quick, prompt reaction that there'll be therapists, not medical people, not doctors. You don't have to go, you don't go to a specialist arthritis rheumatologist because you have a pain in your hand. And for me, the health service, almost the psychiatry service is like, and this will be interesting to you, it's like the health service without physios. If you did no physios, everyone with a pain would go to an orthopedic surgeon. And it would just clog up.
To the extreme end straight away.
So we need a kind of a physiotherapy system,
I get you,
which is a psychotherapy system, which will catch much of those things earlier rather than having everyone waiting outside the orthopedic surgeon's office because they have a pain in their hand.
Refer on when needed and communicate with that referral as well.
Exactly. And look, if you think about general medicine, you have diabetes, arthritis, oncology, all that sort of stuff. Mental health is just mental health. And mental health is the same variation as terminal cancer to the common cold. There's the same... And then they're all trying to just buckle into the one office to try and... It doesn't make sense. It's not surprising the system doesn't work. Do you know? And it doesn't. It's a third world standard,
Do you think that's, again, going back to, because you mentioned there the figures you've seen over in your clinic in the last few years, like that's obviously a huge part of that as well. Are people who are maybe with children that are struggling, are they just kind of abandoning the national system we have and just have to go privately? Is that kind of the standard if you want stuff done at a reasonable pace?
Yeah, the problem is the private lists are now as long as anything else. Do you know what I mean? So that's a bit of an issue. I mean, the investment has to be, like, there's a great quote, we need to stop pulling people out of the stream. We need to go up the river and find out why they're falling in. Do you know what I mean? And there's no sense of that. And I would ideally, I'd love to see mental health teams and psychotherapy teams in schools. So as soon as the kid starts there's a referral point. And a lot of it is signposting, so and I've worked in CAMHS and there's somebody comes to you and they've been waiting on this waiting list for 18 months and they arrive to see you and they're going, you're in the wrong queue. You should have been over there. Do you know what I mean? So now you have to go and join that. Whereas, if you go to the airport in the summer, someone's going to, rather than have everyone looking up at that big screen, someone's going to look at your ticket and go there. Or if you go into the cinema, someone says your seat's over here. It's not, it's not rocket science that we need a signposting service to say, okay, this is a social problem, you need to go. That's an education problem, you need to go there. That's a health problem, you need to go there. Rather than having everyone just kind of arriving outside and randomly
Are you
going to the
optimistic
wrong
we'll
person.
get there eventually? Or?
I think it's so possible.
Yeah.
We're a tiny population. We're the size of Manchester.
Yeah.
Do you know, as a country, we have our own ruling state. It's not easy. And the thing is, it's not something that gets votes. You know what I mean? It's something that would take ages to do. And so it's much easier to just try and, like, you know, somebody said it's easier to build a clinic than regenerate a slum. You know, from the point of view of, we'll just get these patchwork jobs and say, I added 4 beds to this.
Yeah. That seems to be how the measurement is, again, talking about the measurement of quantity over the actual quality of work that's getting done.
And again, that's healthcare politics, you know, unfortunately. But it's disappointing because I do think it's possible. I don't think it's beyond the reach of a great deal of organisation and a political will. But unfortunately, we don't have that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think I'm conscious, like, it's a great summary of where that's at, because that only came out earlier this year, didn't it? Like, again, it's still, I think it still seems to be sending ripples around the place. And hopefully people listening to this, and parents in particular, if they kind of get their head around this and understand a little bit more, and it becomes, if more people are aware of it, then it becomes a priority for people. And then when people are going to the voting polls or wherever else, then all of a sudden the decision makers might actually start listening and make it a priority. Again, it's just kind of usually where change happens has to start from the ground up and build that pressure.
And just for your listeners, there's a service called Jigsaw, which kind of is trying to fill that gap.
Okay.
And there's, I think, 14 of those around the country.
Yeah.
They're funded publicly. And it's, I don't know whether not a lot of people know about them, or people just assume to go to CAMS first.
Yeah.
But if you have a child out there who's wondering, look to your local Jigsaw and see if they have any space to see them, because they're doing a lot of work with online sessions and Zoom sessions and things like that. So, worth checking out for sure.
If we were, I suppose, as we're recording this now, it's literally the week where kids are going back to school. So by people listening to this, they're probably a week or two down the line. Is there any certain signs that parents should maybe watch out for if they were worried, like, with kids going back to school? Some kids are running in the door, other kids just aren't too keen on school, but then there might be a few who really don't want to go back for maybe bullying reasons, for example, but they may not share that. What would be kind of the stuff that parents could look out for?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not about, it's not about the acuteness of the symptom, it's the length of time that it stays. So from the point of view, where it affects their functioning. So if they're refusing to go to school, or if they're not sleeping at night, or their diet is gone, or their biology or their social world, they're more disconnected. They're kind of isolating themselves a lot more than they usually would. A sure sign is if they're kind of being angry and hostile towards younger siblings. That's kind of a frustration that's oftentimes you can see. Or if they're being more secretive around their phone use and things like that, there can be sometimes that can be red flags that something's going on. But what I'd say is we're all 3-dimensional humans, so we think, we feel, and we do. So you'll see the doing first, so the behaviors, the sleep, the appetite, that sort of stuff. Then you'll address the thinking. So how are you thinking about school? I'm useless, I'm rubbish at this, I'm never going to get through this year, I'm going to fail, whatever. And then the emotions is I feel sad, or I feel. So what we do as parents, we tend to jump to the emotion. Don't jump to the emotion. Use the behavior as evidence. Ask them how they're thinking about something, which is a lot less threatening, and then work towards how do you feel about all of that, rather than tell me how you feel, which sometimes can feel like you're shining a light in their face, and they might not have the answer for that.
Yeah.
Do you know, so work your way in.
Yeah. So again, to question the feeling is probably the best way to summarize that. Yeah, it's a nice way of bringing it together. And then when people because a lot of parents they want to do right by their kid, but maybe they haven't got the toolbox to then, when the feelings open up, when is the kind of the signal then to maybe refer it or get help, or where would they go to next? Would they go straight to Jigsaw, or could they go to the GP first, or a GP refer, or what's kind of the next step if they were worried about their child, they've had a conversation, and they're kind of not really sure what to do next, if they think they need some external help? Yeah,
GP is usually the first port of call. I mean, I'd exhaust your own resources first, so that you're within your family and your support. I mean, we have to be very careful that we don't pathologize everything. Sometimes I worry about that a lot. I think we've gone from mental health promotion to mental illness promotion. So
would ADHD be a good example?
Example of that, yeah. Do you ever forget things? You might have ADHD. Do you like things to be back, put them back where you found them? You've got OCD, and that sort of thing. And there's lots of that sort of mental illness promotion, which is not helpful. Life is not, pathology is a very specific thing. And not all worry is anxiety. Not all sadness is depression. You know what I mean? So lots of parents who get in touch with me are very highly worried about something. And you're kind of saying, that's absolutely normative. That'll be fine. That's just, things like children who struggle to sleep at night when they're around 9 or 10, and they're kind of worried about people dying, and they're worried about death. And that's a very normal developmental thing. However, if they don't come out of that after a few weeks and it's staying, then it's... And so I would always use the example of, if you go to visit your friend who's just broken up from a relationship and she's upset and she's in a tracksuit and she's eating Ben & Jerry's and listening to Adele, you wouldn't bring her to the GP because you'd say it's
part of the process,
You came back 6 months later, she's still doing that.
Yeah.
Then you might think she needs some help at that point. So rather than the extent of the like things like grief, it's important that people are sad about loss. They should be allowed to be upset. They should be allowed to struggle. It's when the struggle doesn't seem to be coming back, or you're not coming back from it with the normal resources. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Do you think with parents as well, though, like if there's, say, a label out there and the label maybe provides a bit of comfort and understanding, that they could be close to jump towards that as well? So say, like, I have a child who's struggling a little bit and I'm not too sure what their issues are, but then I hear that, oh, he could have this. There's maybe a confirmation bias there, maybe that the parent might want to kind of lean towards that a bit more because it allows them then to understand what's going on. Would that be part of it as well as a parent?
Yeah, I think that can work both ways.
Yeah.
I think there's a kind of a sense of, you see parents who come to you and they want to know what it is. And the label is a reassurance in the sense, okay, your child has ASD symptoms, or your child has ADHD, or your child is this. And there's a kind of, oh, thank God, now we know what to do. There are other parents who will go to everybody to prove that their child doesn't have something that they glaringly do.
Okay,
so there's teachers telling them, there's
crash
creche people telling them there's something wrong. They're going, no, that's just that. Teachers, that's just that. And they don't want to see it in themselves. And so you can oftentimes have that problem where you're actually trying to say to someone, actually, I think your child does have a problem. I think those 7 people that you went to are all correct, and sometimes we therapy shop to try and find someone who'll confirm the diagnosis for us, or people who will confirm that there's nothing wrong, and again, because that lack of the blood test, X-ray, you're
it's
going
such a fine line,
things.
like there's no definite answer, as you said, that makes this, it's just such a challenging thing, really, you know.
And again, I would say, when it comes to assessment and things, and I know they're hard to come by and everything else, you're better off doing it for peace of mind. If you can get, if something is ruled out, it should be relief. Rather than, trying to kind of pretend it's not there or try and find some explanation for it.
Well, I think like a lot of conversations we have with different people from different sectors on the podcast, a lot of it's all about talking about creating awareness for people, because when you have awareness, then you can actually go recognize there's a problem, and then you can actually get working on it then, which is huge. When we were chatting earlier, you mentioned, we were talking about parenting and we spoke about comparison, but I think comparison goes on a little bit further, a little bit deeper for the word that you mentioned, which was pressure. As adults, and this is where I want to kind of link in with the book you've released recently, where does this pressure come from? Do you think? We touched on it a little bit there. We talked about the comparison, keeping up with the Joneses, all this sort of stuff, social media. Where does this, there seems to be some sort of a pressure there that we all need to be the absolute best at everything we do. We need to be the best dad, run the best podcast, be the best psychotherapist. And a lot of that seems to come from a good place, because we want to do better and improve. But where does that become potentially toxic, for example, where it makes other areas of your life suffer? And how do we kind of strike that balance between both?
And that's the kind of reason why I kind of went to writing the book, was because I felt we live in a kind of anti-regulation, anti-balance culture, right? So you'll hear terms like unlimited, all you can eat, binge watch, and we're normalizing excess, right? And we have this kind of drive towards intensity. And in your fitness world, you'll understand this, get 6-pack abs in 5 weeks and, this sort of stuff. And
it's 4 weeks is what most people are advertising these days now.
Do you know what I mean? So
dropped a week,
intensity over consistency, which is always a recipe for disaster, right? But the biggest issue I have is, and again, let's go back to children. Look at the issues in children's sport, right? The referees, the silent sidelines, all these things. They're not 2 9-year-olds knocking the heads off each other. They're parents, right? So when you see your child as an investment, and I'm going to send you to the Gael school so you get an A in your Irish. I'm going to teach you piano because you can get points in your leaving cert. If I'm going to send you to the soccer club because you're going to be a Premiership footballer and be my pension, or whatever it might be. Right from the off there, you've put pressure on something, right? If everything is an investment, your children have nothing to do for fun, right? So everything becomes, I'm doing this for a reason. And parents go, I didn't bring you to all those things for you to just have the crack. I want you to come out with your grade 5 piano, or I want you to come out with your fluence in French because I sent you off to that thing for the summer. And as parents, we need to stop seeing children as an investment. And we also need to stop seeing them as an extension of ourselves. You know, in some respects, they're their own human beings. But the parent problem is that, and I think we've fallen into this trap of, we have demonized average, right? So if you hear only average, just average, you feel your child...
It's usually the word that comes before average, isn't it?
And your child's going to be disappointed. I could set you a challenge. Everyone you meet tomorrow and they ask you how you're doing, say, I'm having an average day. They'll say, why, what's wrong? You know? And so the idea, if you make average unsatisfactory, by definition of 10 people in a room, one is exceptional, one will struggle, the other 8 are average. No matter what the standard is, most people will be average. So the issue of, if we make average and demonize it, we make 80% of the population consigned to discontent. And that's what we've done. So if everyone is shooting for that 10%, right? And if you're not in the 10%, you've failed. So success is 9 out of 10. Anything below 9 is failure. We lose all sense of spectrum. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely,
And the idea of, where is that pressure coming from? Everyone needs to be in that top 10. Everyone's vying for that. And everything, because everything is functional, purposeful, investment, you know, I have to get this out of that. And in actual fact, we've been a nation that has been, you know, known for the crack. You know, we have lost a whole sense of what the crack is. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't think we do anything for the crack anymore. I think there's always purpose, function, drive. But that demonization of average, it's the saddest thing I've ever seen happen. And that's language. You know, language has moved that.
How, in keeping it in Ireland terms, when have you think that's kind of kicked into our culture?
Probably about 7-8 years ago. I think there was a time, believe it or not, when you were told your child is average, that you went, phew. You know, because it was met with relief, not disappointment. But now it is, you know, and it's in line with, you know, everybody has to go to college. If you're not going to college, you're only going to PLC, or you're only going to this, or you just take a year out. But there's a judgment in all of that. Back when CAO came out in 1993 or whatever it was, I think it was 60% of people got over 280 points. Now it's like 80% of people getting over that. You know, it's a massive hike in performance. Not because the exams have gotten easier, but our expectations have gotten higher. Do you know what I mean? And what we're doing is we're placing adult standards on children. I want you go to an under-9 soccer team. They're doing drills from Pep Guardiola's Man City
the manager
team.
has tactics for it out.
And all that sort of stuff. And that's the grown-ups. That's not the children. Children aren't driving that. Children go to play sport, to meet their friends, to have fun, and to learn something new. And I think we've lost that.
With the grown-ups then, who are, say, like the under-9s manager, for example, and like, I know part of him in his logic, in his logical thinking, is going to say, I want the best for these kids. I want to give them the best session I can. But do you think that comparison, is it fueled by like an underlying insecurity we all have? Is that what's the underlying effect, or does it go deeper again, or is it something different, do you think?
I think that it's naturally the people who are drawn to those roles are people who are kind of, because there's a huge amount of work. I coach, I'm part of these processes. I know what goes into the WhatsApp groups and the organising, washing jerseys and all that sort of stuff. You really need to be into it to do it. Do you know what I mean?
It's a vocation.
So the people who are into it. Do you know what I mean? And so the idea of this under-9s team is a reflection of me and my ability. Like, how ridiculous is that? Do you know what I mean? Like, you could go and coach a senior team and do brilliantly, but you take the under-9s, it's not the same thing. Do you know what I mean? But the idea that we feel under pressure to perform, and it's pressure from other parents. You know what I mean? Why are you playing him? He's rubbish. He wasn't there last week. Put it in him. And that or sort of interference.
Everyone involved in child sports says the same thing. The kids are great. It's the parents that can't stand it. The kids wreck my head. And that's why so many walk away from it after
Do you know
a
what I
while.
mean? Like that, and that's us. That is adults. That's where we have to hold the mirror up and say, like, we are creating the pressure that people, like that, the narrative of better, you need to do better, you need to do that, comes from us, not them.
Do you think then with this, like there'll be some people, a small minority maybe people listen to this who will say, oh, I don't agree with that because I perform well under pressure. I need to be put under pressure. Maybe it's a high achieving businessman, for example, using an example, who says that, no, I don't agree with that. I think you need to be put under pressure to get out of your comfort zone and achieve. And absolutely, it will probably have some quantitative success in certain aspects of your life. But then we go back to what we were talking about earlier about the qualitative stuff with spend time with your kids. It's obviously a lot harder to measure. And how do you form that distinction of maybe there is healthy times to go above and beyond average, but then also then at what cost? How do you kind of evaluate the cost of going all in and putting yourself under a lot of pressure in work, for example? Yes, you might get the promotion, or yes, you might get hit the income targets you're trying to do, but again, there's a bigger picture here. It's not just all about work. If you've got a family, you've got kids, and you have to look after your own health as well.
You see, people are varied. So the idea that there's going to be an obsessional group of people, and you may need that obsessional thing to perform at elite levels in your job or in sport, or you almost need the obsessionality in order to do it. But that's a tiny percentage of the world. Do you know what I mean? So there's a far greater percentage of people who are not within that bracket. So if I am 14 years of age and I want to play sport, I have to join a club that's going to train Tuesday, train Thursday, match Saturday, Sunday, aim for medals, prove strength and conditioning, or else I don't play at all. There's no five-a-side culture for teenagers.
Yeah.
There's no
point. Yeah.
Just social sport. Like, I want to move and I want to be active, but I don't want to. It's not a lack of competition. Like, I play five-a-sides and I play tag rugby every week. And for that hour, it's very competitive. But if I had to do it twice a week and meet on a Sunday and do it, I wouldn't be able to do it at all. So what we're doing is we're taking an elite model of training and and opposing that on children. So that's the sport model you have to buy into, or you don't play sport at all. Do you know what I mean? So, and I've always said it, my dream is, and I'm going to do this someday, is set up like a thing where on Wednesday even there's an Astro pitch and kids come, give 5 jerseys each, they play for an hour, go home. And that's their next Wednesday, come back and do it. And I think you'd pick up a lot of the kids, because there's ego-driven kids who want medals, prizes, unbelievably so. And that's absolutely, they should be supported. They should have a pathway.
Is that natural, or is that passed on from parents, or is it both?
Both. Okay. Both. Sometimes you can't create competitive in a child who's not, but there's just kids who are just, see them at under 4s and they're slide tackles, and they just need to they have that drive in them. And I think from the point of view of, there should be a pathway for those children, for sure, but there shouldn't be no pathway for anyone else. And I think it's in some ways the loudest voice in the room determines the culture of the team in many ways, and that's oftentimes the loudest parent or the most high performing child within the group, and we all need to kind of
bow to their needs,
And so for me, there's a need for us to kind of not succumb to the pressure. And like, I would say clubs and communities are interesting, because I always put it this way: you either say the community serves our club, so we want the best of the community to come here and play, and we want to win medals and prizes, or the club serves the community. So whatever the community is made up of, we will provide for those people, right? And if that's explicit, that's fine. Then the competitive kids go here, and the ones who kind of just want to play go there. Do you know what I mean? But it's not explicit. We say we're a welcoming all club, but as soon as you get in, it's something quite different.
It's a rigid structure there straight away. You're in or you're out.
Yeah. So I think there's, as the adults in the room, and I think as a lot of dads probably listening to this podcast, we need to kind of say, are we catering for most or all, or whose pressure are we succumbing to do it?
Yeah, it's a great point. I love that. That's a really good summary about the lack of a five-a-side culture in kids sport. Like, it's a great way of putting it into perspective, because I think, like, I don't know what age group it is. It's usually around 12 or 13 when kids are still only finding their way. It's like, you have to choose. Do you want to play Gaelic or do you want to play football? Because they're both twice a week and they're playing at the weekends, and all of a sudden they all clash. And it's like, these athletes have to make this huge decision. Like, I was forced that decision when I was younger. I was better at football than I was at GAA. But I always look back and think what my life could have been like if I played GAA, if I chose the other way. But at the time, I didn't have the perspective or the capacity. And then as each year rolls on, it's another year without playing the other sport. So it's harder to go back each year, And again, you're only a child. And then you kind of wake up in your 20s when you have the perspective and realise, oh yeah, that wasn't ideal. But again, and nobody meant any harm. Everybody, the Gaelic team just wanted to be successful and be the best it could be. So this was the requirement that was needed. But
and it's important to say, I don't think any coach goes out and says, I'm going to destroy the self-esteem of those children.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's never that intention. It's always with the best of intentions. But I just think we need to sit back a little bit and say, what are we providing here? And where's this pressure coming from? And how can we relieve the valve of it a little bit?
Definitely, yeah.
And those who want pressure, opt for it, and those who don't should have a menu option too.
Just for perspective, like, again, this is something I'm always trying to balance in the gym. Like the program I run with Bulletproof Dad, we'd have some guys who are way more into their training than others, but then so we're trying to create an environment where first and foremost everybody enjoys showing up to And it's just we have a model that we kind of call the 3 Fs. It's like form, flow, and fun. So fun is a big part of what we do. So form is kind of how we look after all the guys and their needs and individualize stuff depending on where they're at. So if they want to push on certain exercises and strength and stuff, they can do that. Then the flow is kind of how we can keep everything moving together. So if I have a beginner here, a more advanced guy here, how it can all intertwine. But then for all the guys, even the advanced guys, it does need to have some element of fun to it as well, because if it's all serious training and they training, they'll get results in inverted commas, which is whether it's weight loss or strength or whatever else. But if it's just too intense, they've been working all day, they're flat out at home, they have to have somewhere where they can kind of just relieve a bit of stress and have a bit of crack. And it's so important. Some lads value the crack over the training, some lads value the training over the crack, and you're trying to balance that, and you never get it fully right for everybody, but it's a constant thing we're working on. And that's in adults. So like, again, you can probably multiply that by 100 when it comes to kids, I'd say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember looking at the training session that we were doing one day, and there was about 5 minutes before when everyone was and the lads were just all taking shots on each other and they were having the crack, and there was a few lads swinging out at each other, and then we called them all in and said, right, lads, shush, everyone listen up. Blah, blah. I was thinking, given what these kids have lost out on in the last number of years, 5 minutes of drills and 55 minutes of messing around actually would be more valuable to them. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And if I'd suggested that, they would have thought I was nuts. Do you know what I mean?
A lazy trainer doesn't know what he's doing.
Our parents would have said,
exactly,
what am I sending him down here for? He's going to get out there this evening. So there's almost a consumer-driven demand to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It's funny, like the optics there, they probably want to see the trainer with the whiteboard out and the tactics and stuff. Oh, he's really into it. He's a brilliant coach. Yeah. But again, like, you're literally paralysis by analysis going on to a 10-year-old. So, but it's funny, like what you're getting rewarded for by the parents is probably not what's best serving the kids in a way. Yeah.
It could be what's causing most kids to drop out.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Where would you see in your clinic, is there a certain bracket or point where you see a major kind of, maybe it's a certain year in school or a certain age bracket where you see this kind of critical point where a drop-off happens?
Wrote about it recently. Second years is the big peak year for bullying, for leaving sport, for exclusion. And it's interesting because in primary school, you're kind of best friends, you and me and only the two of us, it's kind of territorial. And then first year, everyone's finding their feet. And then in second, third year, that's when the group mentality happens. So there's a much larger membership.
As a parent, would you probably let your guard down a bit as well? I'm sure when your kid goes in first year, you're watching out for everything, and then they know they're settled, they're fine now. It can kind of...
Everyone says like they've gotten through first year, they know their way around, they've got the geography of the place, they know the timetables were sorted. It's actually, that's the time where you actually need more intense intervention because it's the kind of peak year where problems can happen. But it's also that's the hormonal surge. It's also the kind of jump from teenage discos, from your GAA jersey to makeup.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. Yeah. Puberty, onset periods, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a moving day, as they say in golf.
Yeah. And do you see, like, is sport something that you would always... Obviously, you can't push it on kids, and there's different sports that suit different kids, whether it's martial arts or whether it's a team sport or whatever. But is it something that you would value a lot as...
Huge. Yeah. I can tell you that there's children who come to me where sport has saved their lives.
Yeah.
There's also children who come to me where sport has ruined their lives. So it's
the people in the sport, though.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the culture of it. But it's like a teacher. A good teacher can absolutely help a child so much, they can excel, but a bad teacher who they just clash with can create so much damage. So but sport as a communal coming together, learning skills together, camaraderie, life, laboratory of life experience, when done well, can be absolutely transformative for children, for sure.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more there, definitely. But with where we're at with the 4 to 7 zone, I think we've got a great perspective of it there. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that maybe I've missed out on?
Yeah, no, the 4 to 7 zone, the whole idea of the notion is, when people come to me, I'd ask them, how's your sleep, how's your appetite, all that, and I would ask them to rate it out of 10. So everyone that was sitting in front of me said 1, 2, 3 or 8, 9, 10. I never saw
good or bad.
Never saw the 4 to 7 people. So there's something about these 4 to 7 people they're doing something right. They're not ending up in therapy.
I get you, yeah.
So the issue was, when you look at your diet, your exercise, your approach to your work-life balance, your anxiety levels, life will throw us into 1, 2, 3, and 8, 9, 10 for sure, right? But the problem is staying there. So you almost have to find your way back to 4 to 7, even momentarily. So you have a busy thing going on in work. You might be 8 out of 10 work for that mile. But when that calms down, you go down to 1, 2, 3. If you can't be arsed and you're really lost motivation for your work, it's down by 1, 2, 3. That might happen for a week or two, but you come back up. The problem is staying in those zones or not spotting it. So the 4 to 7 zone is very simply keeping an eye on your biology, your psychology, your social world. Like, am I spending too much time, I can't be with myself, or am I, isolating myself more than I ever would, or am I going out too much in my alcohol intake, my food intake? And like, it's small changes in, from the diet perspective. Oftentimes we go, right, I'm going paleo, caveman diet, I'm going to, and by Saturday you've failed.
Yeah.
Because you're set the expectation
the piece of bread,
high, and so the idea of the 4 to 7 zone is in that middle. If you can go from 8 to 5 and 2 to 4, that's actually enough. But it's enough for you. It doesn't have to. The dial doesn't have to flip. And balance isn't eating a pizza with a slender tone on your stomach. That's not what balance is.
Some lads listen to this now are heartbroken hearing that.
It's about trying to keep it in the middle as much as possible. And I'll leave it on this. When you're talking about physical health, I'm sure you're saying getting your heart rate up and getting your calories down. Mental health is the opposite. Okay. It's about equilibrium, balance, and middle. It's not about those extremes. Because the extremes is when you're in the red zones. Yeah. It's the middle when you're safest.
Definitely, yeah. Well, I think going back to what you spoke about there, the heart rate zones and the calories, you do that for short term, but you can't be, like, people who want to lose weight talk about calorie deficit. You can't be in a calorie deficit for your whole life, because
you can't have a pulse of 140 all the time.
Away, unfortunately, you do have to go back to the equilibrium that keeps us safe. Dr. Colman Noctor, this has been an absolutely fascinating chat. Before I let you go, there's going to be people who've taken huge value out of this today. If they want to find out more about you, what's the best thing they can do? Is it pick up the book? Is it follow you on Instagram? Tell us where the best things to do are.
Yeah, the 4 to 7 zone is available in all bookshops. It's out since about May, and it's not just a parenting thing, it's for adults in general. It's available on Audible in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, so hopefully late September it should be available.
Brilliant,
on there. Instagram, Dr Colman, I think is the thing on that. And I put up some reels and kind of spread a tip on a Sunday evening if I can remember to do it.
And a few videos of the dog as well. Then
if you do, the dog is there too. The dog is there too. But I mean, again, I try and make content as available as possible to help as many people as possible. But I'm easy found. I'm on the Ray Darcy show every month and the Examiner every week. So
brilliant.
You'll catch me somewhere there.
Excellent. And just to finally summarize, you mentioned there, Jigsaw was the company, or not the company, but the organisation to look out for. Yeah.
So the Jigsaw are kind of trying to address that gap between those who need to go to mental health services and those who kind of don't need any service at all. So it's that kind of middle gap. And I've spoken to members of their team recently, and they've updated me that they've quite a few services nationwide now at this stage, and they would be a good point of contact. Yeah.
Excellent. Listen, thank you so much for your time, Colman. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Andy, thank you.